I should have realized something was wrong when Lillian called me 4 times in 1 week to confirm I was attending her 75th birthday gala. "You're coming, right, Claire? I need final numbers for the vineyard," she kept saying, her voice tight and overly bright, like someone forcing cheerfulness through clenched teeth. For 42 years she had been my closest friend, the sister I never had, so I brushed off the unease that crept into my stomach. Lillian had always been meticulous about her events. If the napkins weren't folded exactly right, she would refold every single one herself. So, I reassured her each time. "Of course I'm coming. I wouldn't miss it for anything." Meanwhile, in my studio apartment overlooking Lake Merritt in Oakland, I was finishing the gift I had been secretly working on for nearly a year. Something intimate, something deeply personal, something that held pieces of her life she believed were lost forever. I had poured my heart into it. I never imagined I would leave the party with it still in my hands. The evening of the celebration, I wore the emerald dress Lillian once said made me look dangerously elegant, paired with the gold bracelet she had given me after my divorce. The event was held at a private vineyard estate in Napa Valley, all fairy lights and live string quartets and long tables draped in ivory linen. The scent of roses and oak barrels filled the air. But the moment I stepped onto the gravel path, something felt off. People I had known for decades avoided my eyes. Conversations dimmed when I passed. A few polite smiles were stretched thin, brittle. Lillian's son, Andrew, greeted me with a stiff hug. "Glad you made it," he said, as though my presence surprised him. I laughed awkwardly. "Your mother practically threatened me if I didn't." He didn't laugh. Instead, he pointed toward a table far from the head table, tucked near the restrooms and catering station. My name was elegantly scripted on a card, alone. 6 empty chairs surrounded it. Dinner was slow and excruciating. Guests eventually filled the seats at my table, acquaintances, distant business partners of Lillian's husband, strangers who treated me like a contagious secret. No one mentioned my history with Lillian. No one brought up the decades of summers in Carmel, the nights we stayed up crying over heartbreaks, the time she slept on my couch for 3 months when her marriage nearly collapsed. It was as if I had been edited out of the narrative of her life. When dessert arrived, Andrew clinked his glass and called for attention. He gave a warm speech about loyalty and integrity, emphasizing how his mother valued honesty above all else. I felt a flicker of pride. That was true. It was something we had always shared. But then Lillian stood, her silver hair glowing beneath the vineyard lights, and the entire atmosphere shifted. "I want to thank my true friends," she began, her voice steady but sharp. "The ones who have proven their loyalty. The ones who don't smile to your face while destroying you behind your back." My breath caught. Her gaze locked onto mine, unblinking. A ripple of discomfort moved through the guests. "Some of you may wonder why Claire is here tonight," she continued, lifting her champagne flute slightly in my direction. My ears rang. The world seemed to tilt. I invited her, so she could hear from me directly, in front of everyone, that betrayal has consequences. Murmurs rose. My fingers dug into the fabric of my dress. Betrayal? I could barely process the word. She accused me of spreading rumors about her health, of manipulating her husband during a vulnerable time, of trying to undermine her business partnerships. Each accusation was more absurd than the last. I wanted to stand up, to scream, to demand proof, but shock rooted me to my chair. Finally, she raised her glass. "To learning who your real friends are." Glasses clinked hesitantly around the courtyard. I did stand then. My knees trembled, but my voice surprised me with its calm. "I have never betrayed you," I said softly. "Not once." She smiled, cold, unfamiliar. "That's what betrayers say." The humiliation burned hotter than the California sun. 42 years collapsed into ash in a matter of minutes. I looked around at faces I had trusted, seeking even one ally, but no one moved. No one spoke. I picked up my clutch, the weight of the wrapped gift pressing against my palm, and said, "Happy birthday, Lillian." Then I walked away under strings of glittering lights that now felt like interrogation lamps. Gravel crunched beneath my heels as I left the estate. No one followed me. I didn't go home immediately. Instead, I told the rideshare driver to take me to the cliffs above the Pacific near Half Moon Bay. The ocean wind hit my face, cold and bracing, as I stood staring at the dark waves crashing below. Betrayal. The word echoed in my mind. What had happened? 3 weeks earlier, we had lunched together at our favorite cafe on College Avenue. She had seemed distracted, yes, but not hostile. The only significant change in her life recently had been that new friend, Vanessa Drake, a charismatic philanthropist who had appeared almost magically during one of Lillian's charity board meetings. Vanessa was glamorous, persuasive, always whispering in Lillian's ear at events. I remembered the way she had once looked at me, measuring, assessing. I had dismissed it at the time. Now, standing above the ocean, I wondered if I had underestimated her. When I returned home close to midnight, my phone was exploding with notifications. Emails, messages, missed calls. At 11:17 p.m., Lillian had sent a mass email to nearly everyone in our shared circles, friends, colleagues, nonprofit boards. In it, she detailed my supposed betrayals with theatrical sorrow, claiming she had confronted me publicly and that I had no defense. My stomach twisted as I read it. Evidence, she wrote. She had evidence of my disloyalty. Private messages, letters, proof of deceit. Letters? I hadn't written her a letter in years. My hands shook as I scrolled through the accusations. Within hours, the damage was spreading. A board member from the museum texted me that my position would be reviewed. An old mutual friend sent a cautious message asking if I was okay, the tone already doubtful. I barely slept. At dawn, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the gift I had refused to leave behind. Inside was something Lillian never expected to see again, a leather-bound compilation of audio transcripts and journal entries she had entrusted to me during her recovery from minor surgery the previous year. She had feared memory loss. She had asked me to keep her recorded confessions, her regrets, her raw, unfiltered truths safe, in case anything ever happened. Those recordings told stories that contradicted every accusation she made against me. They contained her gratitude, her declarations of trust, even admissions about business decisions she had hidden from her own family. I had meant it as a sentimental birthday tribute, a reminder of who we had been to each other. Now it felt like something else, something powerful, something dangerous. That morning, my phone rang again. This time it was Daniel, Lillian's husband. His voice was low, strained. "Claire, I don't know what to believe." And in that moment, I understood. Whatever had poisoned Lillian against me had been working for months. Slowly, methodically, and I had walked straight into its final act. I stared at the leather-bound book on my table and realized the humiliation at the vineyard was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning. By morning, the damage had already spread beyond repair, or at least that was how it felt. My inbox was full, my voicemail blinking relentlessly, my name circulating through whispers I could almost hear through the walls of my apartment. Some messages were cautious and sympathetic, others curious, but a few were unmistakably accusatory. I had built my life carefully after my divorce, rebuilt my reputation, my independence, my standing in the nonprofit community, and overnight it was cracking like thin glass. The most unsettling part wasn't the public humiliation. It was the precision of it. The accusations weren't random. They were specific, detailed, crafted. Someone hadn't simply turned Lillian against me. Someone had constructed a narrative. And narratives require preparation. Around noon, I finally gathered the courage to call Daniel. My hand hovered over his contact for a long time before pressing it. He answered on the second ring, his voice tired, as if he hadn't slept either. "Claire," he said quietly, There was hesitation there, but not hostility. That alone gave me a sliver of hope. Daniel, I need to understand what Lillian thinks I did, I said. Because I swear to you, I have never betrayed her. There was a long silence on the line. Then he exhaled slowly.
She found letters, he said.
Printed emails. Messages between you and me. The room seemed to tilt. What? I whispered. Letters implying that we were closer than we should have been. That you were manipulating me. Encouraging me to question her business decisions. That you suggested she was becoming unstable. His words felt unreal, like a script from a badly written drama. Daniel, I have never written you a single personal letter. The only emails we've exchanged were about gala seating charts and foundation budgets. He hesitated again. They look real, Claire. They're in your tone. Your phrasing. They reference conversations only close friends would know. That was when something clicked in my mind like a lock turning. 6 months ago, Lillian had asked to borrow my old stationery, cream-colored paper embossed with my initials that I rarely used anymore. She said she wanted it for handwritten thank you notes because she liked the weight of the paper. I hadn't thought twice. We had shared clothes, bank cards, even house keys over the decades. Why would stationery matter? Now my stomach churned. Did Lillian find these letters herself? I asked carefully. Or did someone else discover them? Daniel's silence was heavier this time. Vanessa was helping her reorganize the home office last month, he admitted. She said she came across a folder in my desk drawer. There it was. Vanessa Drake. Elegant.
Poised.
Always observing. Always positioning herself between Lillian and anyone who had known her longer than 6 months. After the call ended, I sat perfectly still for several minutes, replaying every interaction I'd had with Vanessa. The charity luncheons where she subtly interrupted my stories. The time she insisted Lillian shouldn't overexert herself by attending my book club. The way she had once told me, with a polished smile, long friendships can become complicated. At the time I thought she was simply territorial. Now I saw strategy. If she wanted access to Lillian's finances, to her estate planning, to the foundation funds, I would have been the largest obstacle. I knew Lillian's habits. I knew her fears. I knew when something was off. Removing me wasn't emotional, it was tactical. That afternoon I received a call from Meredith, the director of the Bay Arts Council, where I served as treasurer. Her tone was professional but strained. Claire, until this situation is clarified, we think it's best if you step back temporarily. I almost laughed at the formality of it. Clarified. As if truth were simply delayed paperwork. There is nothing to clarify, I replied, though my voice trembled despite my effort to steady it. These accusations are fabricated. We hope that's the case, she said quickly, which meant she wasn't sure. When the call ended, I felt the full weight of isolation settle onto my chest. This wasn't just about a friendship anymore. It was about credibility, about identity, about whether decades of integrity could be erased by forged paper. By evening, I decided fear would not dictate my next move. If Vanessa had constructed lies, there would be traces. People who reinvent themselves leave footprints. I called my younger cousin Ethan, a data analyst who had once helped a client uncover corporate fraud. I need a favor, I told him. I need you to look into someone discreetly. He whistled softly when I explained the situation. Claire, this sounds serious. It is. I gave him Vanessa's full name, the city she claimed to have moved from, the nonprofits she said she'd chaired. Something about her doesn't add up. Ethan promised to call back within a couple of days. Waiting felt unbearable, but it was action. And action was better than helplessness. Late that night, unable to sleep, I opened the leather-bound book I had meant to give Lillian. Inside were transcripts of voice recordings she had asked me to keep safe during her surgery recovery. She had been terrified of cognitive decline, her mother had suffered from early dementia, and she made me promise that if she ever started losing herself, I would remind her who she was. The recordings were raw and unfiltered. She spoke about her fears, her regrets about business risks she hadn't disclosed to Daniel, her insecurity about aging, even her envy of younger board members.
Most of all, she spoke about me.
About how I had been her anchor, her witness, the one person who knew her without performance. Listening to her voice now, so different from the cold woman at the vineyard, made my chest ache. Something had shifted in her, and not gradually.
Sharply.
Artificially. The next morning, Ethan called earlier than expected. His tone was no longer casual. "You were right," he said immediately. "Vanessa Drake doesn't exist the way she claims. There's no record of her chairing the New Haven Cultural Trust. No evidence of the Manhattan property she boasts about. But there is someone matching her photo under a different name, Veronica Dale, linked to 2 civil lawsuits involving financial exploitation of elderly women." My pulse pounded in my ears.
Exploitation?
I repeated. "Isolation tactics," he continued. "She befriends affluent women, gradually inserts herself into financial discussions, creates conflict between them and long-term confidants, and then money goes missing. Jewelry.
Art.
Transfers masked as charitable donations." The room felt suddenly smaller. "Has she ever been charged?" I asked.
No convictions. Settlements.
The victims were too embarrassed to pursue criminal cases. I hung up and stared at the wall, my mind racing. If Vanessa had manipulated Lillian, perhaps even tampered with medication, I remembered Lillian mentioning new anxiety prescriptions recently, then her paranoia about betrayal might not have originated from within. It might have been fed, encouraged, amplified, which meant the letters were only one piece of a much larger design. But proving it would require confronting Lillian again, and this time, I couldn't walk away humiliated. I needed her to see the truth. And the only way to break through manipulation is with undeniable memory. I looked at the leather-bound book again. It was no longer just a sentimental gift. It was evidence of who Lillian had been before Vanessa arrived. Evidence of her trust. Evidence of her clarity. If Vanessa's strategy relied on isolating her from her past, then reminding her of that past might be the only way to dismantle the illusion. I picked up my phone and typed a message to Daniel. "We need to talk. In person. Without Vanessa present." I hesitated before pressing send, knowing it would escalate everything. But escalation was inevitable now. Vanessa had declared war quietly months ago. I had simply arrived late to the battlefield. For the first time since the vineyard, I didn't feel only humiliation or grief. I felt resolve. If someone wanted to erase 42 years of loyalty with forged ink and whispered poison, they had underestimated me. I wasn't walking away again. Not this time. Daniel agreed to meet the next morning at a small marina cafe in Sausalito, far enough from Napa and Oakland to avoid curious eyes. The fog rolled low over the water, blurring the outlines of the boats docked along the pier, and I remember thinking how appropriate it felt. Everything in my life had become obscured, shapes without clarity. Daniel looked older than he had just weeks before, his shoulders slumped, his expression worn. He didn't greet me with a hug the way he normally would have. Instead, he studied my face as if searching for signs of deception. "I need to know the truth," he said quietly once we sat down. "Not for Lillian. For me." I nodded and placed the leather-bound book on the table between us. "Then listen carefully. I never wrote those letters. I never suggested you question her. And I would never humiliate her by discussing her vulnerabilities." His jaw tightened. "She's convinced you did." I leaned forward. "Daniel, has her behavior changed beyond just this accusation?" That question seemed to hit him harder than anything else I'd said. He hesitated, then nodded slowly. "She's been forgetful. Suspicious. She insists I've moved things she misplaces. She accused Andrew of discussing her estate behind her back. And Vanessa has been guiding her, advising her." The word advising sounded hollow even to him. I slid the book toward him. Last year, after her surgery, she asked me to keep recordings and letters safe. She was terrified of losing her memory. She made me promise that if she started to doubt herself, I'd remind her who she was. Daniel's eyes softened slightly as he opened the book. I watched his expression shift as he read fragments aloud. Claire knows my worst fears and still stays. If I ever push her away, it will mean I'm not thinking clearly. His hands trembled. She wrote this, he asked. Yes. I swallowed hard. She trusted me with her unfiltered truth. Daniel closed the book slowly. Vanessa found the letters between you and me, he murmured. But now I'm wondering if she planted them. I nodded. My cousin found records under a different name, civil suits involving financial manipulation. Daniel looked up sharply. You're saying Vanessa is targeting her? I'm saying the pattern fits too perfectly to ignore. The fog outside thickened, and in that moment I realized we were no longer discussing friendship drama. We were discussing vulnerability, exploitation, possibly even cognitive decline being weaponized. Daniel confessed that Vanessa had encouraged Lillian to adjust certain financial structures for protection. She had subtly suggested Andrew was irresponsible, that I was opportunistic, that long-term friends sometimes become resentful of wealth. She had inserted herself into estate planning meetings. The more Daniel spoke, the clearer the strategy became. Isolate, create doubt, fabricate betrayal, become indispensable. And the medication? I asked carefully. Daniel rubbed his forehead. Her doctor prescribed mild anti-anxiety pills months ago, but Vanessa recommended a specialist who adjusted the dosage. Since then, Lillian's moods have been volatile. A chill ran through me. Increased anxiety, paranoia, suggestibility. The perfect storm for someone eager to rewrite her perception of reality. Daniel, we have to approach her carefully, I said. If we attack Vanessa directly, she'll convince Lillian we're conspiring. He nodded, tension visible in his jaw. Then what do you suggest? I took a breath. We remind her who she is. Without accusing anyone. We let her see the contrast. That afternoon, Daniel arranged for Vanessa to accompany Andrew to a property viewing in Sonoma under the pretense of investment planning. While they were gone, he texted me to come to the house. My heart pounded the entire drive to Napa. I had walked through those doors hundreds of times, but this time felt like entering contested territory. Lillian was in the sunroom when I arrived, staring at the garden with a distracted expression. When she saw me, anger flared instantly. You have nerve coming here, she snapped. Daniel stepped in gently. Lily, please. Just listen. I kept my voice calm. I'm not here to argue. I brought something that belongs to you. She crossed her arms, but didn't tell me to leave. That was something. I sat across from her and opened the leather-bound book. Do you remember giving this to me? I asked softly. She frowned. No, her answer came too quickly, defensive. I turned the book toward her and pointed to her handwriting. Recognition flickered across her face despite herself. She reached out hesitantly, running her fingers over the ink. I wrote this, she whispered.
Yes.
You were afraid you'd forget things. You asked me to keep these safe. She began reading aloud quietly. The words were unmistakably hers, her phrasing, her humor, her rhythm. As she turned pages, her expression shifted from irritation to confusion, then to something deeper. I remember recording this, she murmured at one point. You were in the kitchen making tea. Daniel glanced at me, hope barely concealed. Memory was resurfacing. I didn't mention Vanessa's name. Not once. Instead, I asked gentle questions. When did you first start feeling that I betrayed you? She hesitated. After the letters, she said slowly. But before that, I'd already been uneasy. Uneasy about what? She pressed her fingers to her temple. I don't know. Conversations felt distorted. I would say something, and later Vanessa would repeat it differently, as if I'd implied something else. Her voice wavered. Sometimes I wasn't sure if I had. Daniel crouched beside her chair. Lily, you've been under a lot of stress. Anyone could become overwhelmed. She looked between us, uncertainty clouding her eyes. But the letters, I reached into my bag and pulled out copies Ethan had sent me of Vanessa's previous aliases. I didn't push them toward her yet. If someone wanted to isolate you, I said gently, what would they need to do? Lillian frowned. Make me distrust the people closest to me. The realization seemed to land slowly, like a stone sinking through water. She closed the book abruptly and stood up, pacing near the windows. I accused you publicly, she said, her voice cracking for the first time. I sent that email. I felt the sting of it again, but kept my composure. Yes, I answered honestly. You did. Tears welled to her eyes, and for a brief moment I saw the Lillian I'd known for decades, proud, strong, but deeply emotional beneath it all. Why would I do that? She whispered. Daniel's voice softened. Because you were afraid. Silence filled the room. Fear can be manipulated more easily than anger. And someone had clearly been feeding hers. Before we could go further, the sound of the front door opening echoed through the house. My pulse quickened. Vanessa's voice drifted down the hallway, smooth and controlled. Lillian, darling? We're back early. Lillian's face drained of color. Daniel squeezed her hand. It's okay, he murmured. Vanessa entered the sunroom moments later, her expression freezing when she saw me. This is inappropriate, she said sharply. Lillian shouldn't be stressed like this. Her eyes darted to the book in Lillian's lap. I watched something calculating flicker across her features. We're just revisiting memories, Daniel replied evenly. Vanessa stepped closer. Lillian, you said being around Claire makes you anxious. Lillian looked at her, then at me. There was hesitation now, doubt where certainty once stood. I don't remember saying that, she admitted quietly. That tiny crack in Vanessa's control was enough to shift the energy in the room. Vanessa recovered quickly, placing a hand on Lillian's shoulder. You've been confused lately. That's all. It's natural at your age. The condescension in her tone was subtle, but unmistakable. Lillian stiffened slightly at that. I am not incapable, she said firmly. It was the first clear assertion she'd made all afternoon. Vanessa's smile thinned. I finally placed the printed documents on the table, not dramatically, just calmly. Before you advise her further, I said evenly, perhaps you'd like to explain these previous lawsuits under the names Veronica Dale and Margaret Hill. Vanessa's composure fractured for a split second. It was enough. The tension in the room thickened, like the fog that morning. Lillian looked from the papers to Vanessa, confusion turning into suspicion. Daniel stepped forward. We verified them. Vanessa's eyes hardened, the warmth draining entirely. You've been snooping, she hissed. We've been protecting my wife, Daniel replied. For the first time, Vanessa had no immediate counter. And in that silence, I realized something critical. The narrative she built relied entirely on Lillian's unquestioned belief. Without that belief, it collapsed. Lillian sank slowly back into her chair, staring at the evidence. The fog wasn't fully gone, but it was thinning. I need to think, she said weakly. Vanessa opened her mouth to protest, but Daniel cut her off. You need to leave, he said firmly. And as Vanessa stood there calculating her next move, I knew this confrontation wasn't over, but the balance had shifted. For the first time since the vineyard, I wasn't the one standing alone. Vanessa didn't argue loudly. She didn't scream or cause a dramatic scene the way someone innocent might when falsely accused. Instead, she became very still. Her eyes moved from Daniel to me, then to Lillian, calculating, assessing, deciding which strategy would work best now that her grip was slipping. This is absurd, she said finally, her voice controlled but colder than I had ever heard it. Digging up unrelated paperwork to confuse an already fragile woman is cruel. Fragile. The word hung in the air like an insult disguised as concern. I saw Lillian flinch. That one reaction told me more than anything else could have. Vanessa had been planting that word carefully for months. Fragile.
Confused.
Forgetful. Vulnerable. If you repeat something enough, even the strongest person begins to question their own mind. Daniel stepped between them, his posture no longer hesitant. "You need to leave," he said again, firmer this time.
Now.
For a moment, I thought Vanessa might push back harder, but instead she straightened her jacket, lifted her chin, and gave Lillian a look that was almost pitying. "When you're ready to stop letting them manipulate you, call me," she said softly. Then she walked out. The front door closed with a quiet click, but the silence that followed felt enormous. Lillian stared at the table, her hands trembling slightly. I resisted the urge to rush toward her. Too much pressure would feel like control, and control was what had just nearly destroyed everything. Instead, I sat down slowly across from her. "You don't have to decide anything right now," I said gently. "Just breathe." Daniel moved to the window, watching the driveway as if expecting Vanessa to storm back in. When several minutes passed and her car didn't return, he exhaled. Lillian finally looked up at me, and what I saw in her eyes was not anger anymore. It was exhaustion. "I accused you in front of everyone," she whispered. "I called you a traitor." Hearing the word again stung, but it no longer felt like a blade. It felt like something dissolving. "Yes," I answered honestly. "You did." Tears welled in her eyes. "Why didn't you fight harder that night?" she asked. The question surprised me. I thought about the vineyard lights, the clinking glasses, the way no one met my gaze. "Because I could see you weren't yourself," I said quietly. "And arguing with someone who isn't thinking clearly only pushes them further away." That was the first moment she truly broke. The composure, the pride, the defensive certainty. It cracked. She covered her face with her hands and began to cry, not the elegant, restrained tears she allowed in public, but deep, shaking sobs. Daniel knelt beside her, wrapping his arms around her shoulders. I stayed seated, giving her space while also staying present. After several minutes, she lowered her hands. "I remember feeling afraid," she admitted. "Small things would unsettle me. I'd misplace something, and Vanessa would gently suggest that perhaps someone moved it. She'd say she only wanted to protect me. She told me long friendships sometimes breed resentment, that people close to wealth can become entitled." Her voice faltered. "She said you might feel overshadowed." I almost smiled at the absurdity of it. If anything, Lillian had always been the more dominant personality. But manipulation doesn't need logic, it only needs doubt. "Did she ever encourage you to increase your medication?" I asked carefully. Lillian hesitated. "She recommended a specialist. Said my anxiety seemed worse. After the dosage changed, everything felt foggy. My thoughts were louder. My fears sharper." Daniel's jaw tightened. "We're calling your doctor today," he said firmly. Over the next hour, pieces continued to fall into place. Lillian admitted that Vanessa had gradually inserted herself into financial meetings, offering to organize documents and simplify estate planning. She had suggested transferring certain assets into temporary trusts for privacy. Thankfully, Daniel had insisted on delaying those changes until after the birthday celebration. The timing now seemed chillingly deliberate. If Vanessa had succeeded in isolating Lillian completely, pushing me out, convincing Andrew he was irresponsible, positioning Daniel as inattentive, she would have become the sole trusted advisor. And once trust consolidates in one person, control follows easily. Lillian looked physically ill as she processed this. "I let her poison me against you," she said, voice hoarse. I believed her. I leaned forward slightly. "You were vulnerable. That's not weakness. That's human." She shook her head.
No.
It was fear. I've been terrified of losing myself ever since my mother's diagnosis. When I couldn't remember where I left my keys, it felt like the beginning of the end. Vanessa offered certainty. She gave me explanations when I needed reassurance. That was the core of it. Fear seeks answers. Manipulators provide them. The next few days were a blur of quiet unraveling. Daniel contacted their attorney to freeze any pending financial transfers. Andrew, once skeptical of me, read through the evidence Ethan had uncovered and immediately shifted into protective mode. Lillian's primary physician reviewed her medication adjustments and confirmed the dosage had been unnecessarily increased. Slowly, the fog that had clouded her perception began to thin as her prescriptions were corrected. She seemed clearer with each passing day, embarrassed, yes, but increasingly grounded. Meanwhile, news traveled quickly through our social circles. Vanessa's departure from Napa was abrupt. Word spread that the police were reviewing past civil complaints under her previous aliases. She had relied on silence and shame to protect her schemes. This time, silence would not shield her. 3 evenings after the confrontation, Lillian invited me back to the Vineyard estate. I hesitated before agreeing. The memory of standing under those lights, publicly accused, still lingered. But healing cannot happen at a distance. When I arrived, the fairy lights were off, the long tables gone, the courtyard empty. It felt stripped of spectacle, honest in a way it hadn't been during the gala. Lillian was waiting near the same spot where she had raised her glass against me. She looked smaller somehow, less armored. "I wanted to stand here with you," she said quietly, without an audience. I walked toward her slowly. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was no longer hostile, it was reflective. "I can't erase what I said," she began, "but I can acknowledge that I was wrong." The simplicity of it mattered more than any dramatic apology. "I forgive you," I replied. And I meant it. Forgiveness doesn't erase pain, but it prevents it from hardening into something permanent. She glanced toward the house. "Do you still have it?" she asked softly. I knew exactly what she meant. I nodded and retrieved the leather-bound book from my car. This time, when I placed it in her hands, it felt like completing something rather than weaponizing it. She opened it and smiled faintly through tears. "You were going to give this to me that night," she said. "Yes." She traced her handwriting gently. "It saved me instead." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. A gift meant to celebrate memory had become the anchor that restored it. We sat together on a stone bench beneath the darkening sky, flipping through pages and recalling moments that had once felt threatened. The time we got stranded in Carmel during a rainstorm. The disastrous charity auction where we accidentally bid against each other. The night she slept beside me after my divorce, because I was afraid of the silence. Memory returned not as fragments, but as warmth. "I thought losing my memory would be the worst thing that could happen," Lillian admitted after a while. "I didn't realize losing my trust would be worse." I squeezed her hand. "You didn't lose it," I said gently. "It was manipulated. There's a difference." She nodded slowly. 42 years, she whispered. "And I almost let 6 months destroy it." I looked out over the dark vineyard rows stretching into the distance. "Long bonds don't break easily," I said. "But they do need protection." She exhaled, leaning back. "No more secrets," she said firmly. "No more letting fear grow unchecked." I smiled. Agreed. As I drove home that night, I realized something had shifted inside me as well. The humiliation at the gala had felt like an ending. In truth, it had exposed the strength beneath decades of routine. Friendship isn't proven when things are easy. It's proven when doubt, manipulation, and fear test its foundation. Vanessa had tried to rewrite our history with forged ink and whispered poison. But history, when documented in truth and memory, is stronger than fiction. The vineyard lights had once illuminated betrayal. Now, in their absence, I saw something clearer: resilience. And some bonds, once tested by fire, do not simply survive. They deepen.